It is currently the evening of May 4th, and it is precisely 1 hour and 1 day after I finished watching Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and here I, Chief Rag, am to present my review of the film here to you. Now I'm going to get straight to the point. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 was my first MCU film which I saw in the cinemas. I've been a Marvel fan ever since, but that was the very first film I saw of this crazy, incredible journey which that film has taken me on. Which is why it is with glee, I must say, this is with ease my favourite Guardians of the Galaxy film out of the three. For me, the film is just such an amazing send-off and summary of all these character stories over the first two Guardians films, as well as Infinity War and Endgame, and even, I guess, for Love and Thunder, because they made an appearance in that too. But I just have to say, there's so much for me to talk about, so much I can get into. So I thought, why not start off with the main character essentially in this film. There's this film, the Guardians film, and then there's inside it another film, the core, the heart of the Guardians trilogy of films, which is the story of Rocket Raccoon. Now, going into this film, lots of speculation on what will happen to the characters, how their stories will end or continue, whether they will end or will continue past this film. And just having seen how everything panned out, I must say it dealt with Rocket's story easily the best, and like, I could not be more satisfied with the way they told this guy's story. I mean, it's just so tragic and so gut-wrenching, and you just look back on the previous Guardians films and you just see his actions and you see them in a whole new light after this film. Because first of all, it just gives him a perfectly understandable backstory for the way he is, and it also just gets you like really into the feels of what this evil villain, the High Evolutionary, who I'll talk about a bit later, and how he just was always haunting Rocket from the day he was born, and there was no chance of escape, and he was just trapped in the state that he was put in by his creator. It's such like a weird dynamic, because the person who made him as smart, as cunning, everything he really is also the person who took away a normal life he could have had as a raccoon. So it's quite crazy. So I think the dynamic between the main character and the villain was phenomenal. Speaking more of the villain, the High Evolutionary, he was a different type of villain we haven't seen in a while in the MCU. If you think about in Phase 4, you think about Gore, you think about Shang-Chi's villain, the Mandarin, you think about Wanda in WandaVision. You think all about all these villains who, of course, they're villains, they're doing crazy, evil, wrecked up stuff, but at their core, you either feel relatable to them or you understand why they're doing what they're doing. In this film, the High Evolutionary, he's just a straight up villain. That guy, he has a twisted goal. He's kind of like Thanos in a way. Twisted goal, thinks it's helping, but at the same time, he's just so evil and so cruel that once you see him in present day and what he's done to Rocket and everyone, all the other things he's tried to do in the past and what he's doing in the current film, you just want to see him die. Like, I can't lie, it's that simple. I'm not sure what the actor's name is, but he does a really good job with the character. I mean, towards the start of the movie, he's very like conniving, and you see him like his superiority complex over everything, belittling everything in his way, because all he believes in is perfection, and he believes he's the closest to that goal and nothing else will come close, but he still tries to create it because no one else will, apparently. But then you get towards the back half of the film, and for the most part he's just like shouting at anyone and everyone to like bring them Rocket. I don't know what it is, but I feel like in this movie there was a lot more shouting compared to the other two Guardians films. I know like the core dynamic of the films, and something I love about them, is that they're like a dysfunctional family who just, they all love each other, but they all have their own different brokenness in some way. But in this film, the High Evolutionary, as well as all the Guardians, they do shout a lot more. But I mean, I guess it's due to the stakes of the film and everything going on, but I must say, it gets a bit annoying at times. Speaking of all the Guardians, you have to talk about another big inclusion, which is Adam Warlock. Now there was an amazing amount of hype. over the post-credit scene, and then Will Poulter, great actor, being announced to play the role. And I gotta tell it to you straight, he's not what you'll be expecting. If you think of Adam Warlock from the comics, which is what you base everything you know and probably like about the character, nah, that's not what you get. Nah. You know, there's one scene in a rather forgettable Marvel film, Age of Ultron, which sums up Will Poulter's Adam Warlock in this film perfectly, and I'm just going to throw it up on screen.
I was born yesterday.
That scene of Vision, that is literally his entire character in the film. I mean, I'm not going to go into too much spoilers, because there was lots of funny jokes and stuff that happens to his character, but it is kind of weird, because you expect something different, and then the end result, which you were so hyped about, is just, it's not what you expected. For me, he's a really funny and interesting character, but I felt you could have done like more with him, because what's it called, I won't get into it because of spoilers, of course, but there's stuff that happens to him in this film and you think, wow, that's really interesting, imagine if that happened to me, what would I do? And then by the end it's just like, he doesn't really build upon it. I feel if you made him one of the main characters of this film and like made him kind of opposite to Rocket, because the High Evolutionary is always, he's obsessed with Rocket, but and perfection more specifically. But you have Adam Warlock, who's meant to be this like perfect specimen. He's not for a different reason in the film, but he's meant to be. You could have had like an interesting dynamic there between like natural born creation versus some artificial form of creation. So yeah, I feel like there were more like compelling things to tell around Alan Warlock's story, but what they did with him was, I liked it. I liked the character, but it's definitely nothing you'll be expecting or probably happy with if you're an Adam Warlock fan before going into this film, which I don't blame you. On that note of Adam Warlock being a new character into this Guardians film, you have to encompass the whole other two Guardians films, which introduced many new characters which are still prevalent in the universe today. And with a 2.5 hour runtime, you'd think there'd be enough time to flesh out nearly every character other than the main Guardians, people like Nebula, Mantis, Kraglin, and I guess Cosmo, who's also a new character in this film, voiced by Maria Bakalova. But there isn't, I'll be honest, all of the Guardians other than Kraglin and Cosmo get their very well deserved completed arcs, which I absolutely love. But I feel like you're watching the film and you're like, you're so invested in these characters, and then you get back and you're like, oh yeah, Kraglin and Cosmo, they exist. I mean, they're relatively entertaining character arcs, but like when you see Kraglin's first scene and his end scene, when you see his first scene, you can easily predict what his end scene will be, and it's precisely that. There's not much development like or whatsoever, but he is a cool character, so I mean, we can let it slide, because I haven't even got into my favourite part of the film, which is how well James Gunn can make this film so emotional, so impactful for all of these characters, for all the 5 main Guardians, Rocket mainly in this film, but even then, Nebula, for me, Nebula, Star-Lord and Drax, those 3, they had some really like emotional and like hard-hitting scenes in this film, which rounded off their character splendidly. I don't want to get into spoilers, of course, too much, but just, I don't know, the way they finish off Star-Lord's character and the way you see how much Nebula's changed and evolved on this team is just, it's the masterclass from James Gunn. It's a masterclass from the MCU. It's why I love the MCU. It's not a bunch of movies where you can just skip one because it's a miss. When you watch a bad episode of TV, you move on to the next one because you hope the next one's going to be good because the past have been good. I mean, past ones have been good. That's how I feel with the MCU. Nebula's story is across so many films other than just the Guardians films that you won't get a full story arc unless you watch all those films, and that's just what makes it so much better and so much good. How she comes to someone who absolutely hates and despises the Guardians, but deep down really just wanted a sister in Gamora, to finding a new family, which is what basically all the characters do, but Nebula in particular, someone who's been so hurt and broken, in pretty similar to Rocket as well. It's just profound in my opinion. It's very, very, very interesting. If we leave the specifics and details for a minute, I must say the plot is relatively basic. It's your average like adventure story gotta defeat this evil guy who's taken one of your friends, with the other whole added layer of Rocket's backstory. But the plot itself is fine. It's nothing like amazing. There's no like insane crazy twists, but you don't need that for a film which is rounding off a character's story and it's letting you know the whole completed lore of everything. Action scenes were actually a star. I'm not gonna lie, I really love the action scenes in this film. Everyone's heard it, but there's the corridor scene. There's a corridor fight. Spoilers. Daredevil fans get excited, and it is just a marvel of CGI, practical effects, and just camera work from every angle to every corner of that corridor. It was going down. Guardians were going crazy. People were dying. It was phenomenal. I really like that scene. But even then, there was also fight scenes with Adam Warlock, he has interesting powers. Well, he can have interesting powers if Marvel were to explore any of their characters' powers in a little bit more detail and a little bit more creativity. But yeah, I like the fight scenes with him as well. Yeah, and the CGI with him flying was pretty good as well. High evolutionary in terms of powers and fight scenes, he was relatively boring. With a character like that, all you need to do is his motives and his like why he's so twisted and whatever. You don't really need his powers to be cool, but it's a plus if they are, which they unfortunately weren't in this film. He was basically like Kang. You think of what Kang can do, he can literally he can do that with a bit more gravity based stuff. So you know, nothing too spectacular there. With if you're hoping for any cool villain fight scenes. Now in terms of the rating for this film, I don't know what James Gunn must have done to make this a 12A. I don't know who he had to get down on his hands and knees for and beg. Oh, I mean Kevin Feige, but I don't know how many times he had to do that, because some of the stuff they show in this film, I am shocked. I was actually really shocked. Like, bro, when you get into Rocket's backstory, you're seeing things that the amount of animal cruelty is actually sickening to a point. Like, you're wincing, you're in your seat, just like, if you really don't like that stuff, like, if you really love animals, bring like a sick bag, bring some tissues, definitely, because there's some crazy stuff that goes down. But yeah, other than that, there's the first F-bomb in the MCU. I know people have been going on about that a lot. I don't really care, but I'll be honest, it is pretty funny. It is a pretty funny scene. I mean, it's paying homage to another film I can't remember the name of, but it is pretty funny. And speaking of that, this Guardians film is easily the most funny of all three of them. People will say they don't like the Guardians 2, but it's really funny. Like, they say, oh, I don't like it because the plot was weak, yada yada, and that's the same thing. But it's extremely funny. This film is 10 times funnier. I think it's probably one of the funniest MCU films of all time. I was dying from start to finish. And the fact that I was dying from start to finish, as well as the most emotional story in the MCU was being told, you know how crazy that is. People talk about how balancing like laughter, comedy, and friggin' seriousness in MCU is like all mixed and matched. There was a bit of that in this film, I'll be honest. You have a horrible, gut-wrenching backstory of Rocket, and then a joke after the next cut. But that's the thing. When something is that like impactful and that crazy, you don't really need time to react to it. You just see it and you're horrified. Maybe it would help to sit with it, but you get enough of it through the film to where you're not really dissatisfied. And that another laugh can actually help ease the tension. You don't want to be depressed going into the next fight scene after you see something horrendous. But yeah, it would help if they just toned it back a little bit. There were times when it was really funny, so I have to give it to him. If you're part of the wider MCU audience and not really like a big fan of the Guardians, but it's part of the MCU and it was a fun enough movie, so you're watching all three, you're not gonna enjoy it as much as someone like myself did. But you're gonna think it's a pretty solid film, and I feel there's a bit of a discussion point about this film about how cruel and dark it is, and it is pretty dark and pretty edgy. I'm not going to sugarcoat that in any way, shape, or form, but but the first Guardians film came out 9 years ago, and I feel if you can't grow, as a film trilogy, you can't grow with your audience, you can't get more mature as they get more mature. I watched that film when I was 8 and I'm 17, seeing the final installment of the trilogy. If I haven't developed enough to where you as a film can't develop enough along with me, then I know you guys still think it's the kids, but come on, man. It just makes so much sense. It makes it more like impactful, as I've been saying for this entire thing. This film was so impactful on me as a Guardians fan, as someone who grew up on MCU. So I understand why, you know, you want to sell tickets to kids because they're the future, but you already did that with Guardians 1. Now we're here at the final hurdle. Why not give the fans something that was amazing and for their mature audiences, which I'm actually kind of glad with a 12A it was. I'm actually very surprised and glad James Gunn was able to pull that off. The final thing I'll talk about before signing out and putting my rating for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is the soundtrack. The soundtrack of this film, just like the other two films, is great. I have to say there won't be as many popularized songs because as they've gone on, you know, they've gone 70s, 80s, 90s, and now 2000s. So you won't get some like old time classics that people forgot about and now playing over and over again in today's society, like Hooked on a Feeling and Come and Get Your Love. But there are still some pretty good songs and pretty like popular songs which were used really well. In the first two films, they were focused on Peter Quill's story, Star-Lord's story, and how they linked into his background and how his father and mother would play those songs and stuff like that, because that's the era they were from. But in this film, it's focused on Rocket, along with some voice lines and dialogue. In this film, the song choices are pretty blunt in telling you like this is Rocket's story, this is about him, and it was like pretty like on the nose, but to its credit, it did help strengthen and like put it in your brain like, wow, this is Rocket's story, this shit is tragic, you need to be paying attention to this because this is what I'm trying to make the movie about. If you're James Gunn, speaking to you. Yeah, with all that said, James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a successful and phenomenal send-off to the amazing characters introduced in 2014, and it adds to the long list of amazing, phenomenal storyline trilogies for characters in the MCU. To rate it out of 10, I would give it an easy 9 out of 10, and if I had to rank it against the rest of the MCU, I'd have to say it is right now definitely in my top 7 MCU films, and easily my favourite third installment of a trilogy, joint with Spider-Man No Way Home. I've been Chief Rag. If you've watched the film, let me know what you think about it. There'll be many more Marvel and MCU content to come. So I've been Chief Rag. Peace! Did I say that twice? I don't know. Hopefully not.